Hello viewers, welcome to the NIOS studio. I am Nishant Sharma and today we will be talking about lesson 22 of your course, which is internal trade. Before we begin discussing the topics under this chapter, a quick look at the topics which we'll be covering in this video. We'll be talking about the internal trade and the types of internal trade, which is the wholesale trade and the retail trade. We will also talk about the types of retail trade and the large scale retailing. Then we will also talk about middlemen and the recent trends in distribution. So to begin with, internal trade implies the trade which takes place within the geographical boundaries or the domestic territory of the country. So when buying and selling of goods or services takes place within the same city, town or village, or from one city, town or village to another, or from one state to another state, but within the same territory, it is called internal trade. And the payment for this trade is settled through the currency of the home country, which in our case is rupee. Internal trade is dependent upon a distribution network comprising of middlemen and other agencies. If we classify internal trade, it can broadly be classified into two parts, the wholesale trade and the retail trade. Wholesale trade involves larger quantities sold by wholesalers to the retailers, and retail trade involves smaller quantities sold by the retailers to the ultimate consumers. If we talk of the functions of the wholesalers, they indulge into assembling, grading and packaging of the goods, then transporting and warehousing of the commodities. They also bear the risk of the trade apart from providing market information and eventually affecting or impacting the selling of the goods. There are certain services which are provided by the wholesalers to the manufacturers and to the retailers. When it comes to services provided to the manufacturers, the wholesalers help the manufacturers in terms of buying bulk commodities from them and also serve as a warehousing facility for the manufacturers. In terms of providing services to the retailers, the wholesalers ensures a regular supply of goods to the retailers. They also provide financial help by providing them the goods on credit basis. Then the advertisement by the wholesalers help the retailers to find further clientele. They also provide market information and up to a great extent risk protection. The way wholesalers bridge the gap between the manufacturers and the retailers bridge the gap by providing services to the consumers and to the wholesalers. The retailers ensure a regular supply of goods and services to the consumers at convenient location with wider choices, and some of the retailers also provide the facility of home delivery. Retailers also help the consumers by telling them how to use the products. And when it comes to providing services to the wholesalers, the retailers, because they are in direct touch with the consumers, can gather market information and provide that information back to the wholesalers, which can be transmitted to the manufacturers. They also help in distribution of the commodities coming from the manufacturers via wholesalers to the ultimate consumers. They also support selling of the new products. Wholesalers and retailers are together called the middlemen in the chain of distribution, because producers, when produce the goods, they need certain middlemen in terms of wholesalers and retailers who will help the manufacturer or the producer to sell or deliver the goods to the ultimate consumers. Now, while discussing them as retailer and as wholesalers in terms of middlemen, sometimes they come under the scanner as to their role. Are they actually desirable in the chain of distribution? Because people are of the mind that when producer produces a certain commodity, for example, if it is produced at rupees 5, and when it is transferred to the wholesaler, producer adds a profit margin of its own, and the commodity of rupees 5 now becomes a commodity of rupees 6. When wholesaler transfers this commodity to the retailer, he adds a profit margin of his own. And when the retailer further transfers the commodity, he also adds a profit margin of his own. And the commodity initially costing rupees 5 is eventually sold off to the consumer for rupees 8.50, thereby increasing the cost for the ultimate consumer of more than 50%. In order to better understand the wholesale trade and the retail trade, we have to look at the difference between the wholesaler and the retailer on certain parameters. So if we talk of number of items wholesaler and the retailer deals in, So the items which are dealt in by the wholesalers are actually very few items, whereas the retailers deal in a variety of items of smaller quantities. When we talk of source of purchase of wholesaler, the product comes directly from the manufacturers, but in case of retailers, the products comes either from the wholesalers or sometimes in exceptional cases from producers as well. The main activity of the wholesaler involves selling goods to reseller for the purpose of further resale, while the main activity of the retailer is to sell goods for the final consumption of the ultimate consumers. If we talk of the amount of capital invested, wholesaler, because he or she indulges into bulk buying, require larger capital to be invested, contrary to the smaller capital requirement of a retailer. Then nature of relationship with the producers and the consumers. Wholesalers is another example of a large scale retailer is a franchise agreement, which is an authorization by one party to the other party to produce and or sell the specified goods and services. There are two parties involved in a franchise agreement, a franchisor and a franchisee. The person who grants the license to manufacture or sell the commodities is known a franchisor, and the person to whom the license is granted is known as a franchisee. With the help of a franchise agreement, the franchisor can expand his business without investing additional capital, because eventually the focus is shifted to the franchisee, and now the franchisee will expand the business of the franchisor. Also, the consumers get the assurance of standardized goods and services, but the downturn of a franchise agreement is that the performance of the franchisee also hit the brand image of the franchisor if the franchisee compromises with the quality of the products or the services. Also, the franchise may become a burden for the franchisee if it is incapable of generating adequate profits. Then next we have recent trends in distribution. There are three major trends in the distribution, which is direct marketing, internet marketing and telemarketing. Direct marketing is an attempt by the manufacturer to bypass all the middlemen from the chain of distribution, and because the middlemen are removed from the chain of distribution, the delivery becomes faster and the profit margins which otherwise was to be taken up by the retailers and the wholesalers can be transferred to the ultimate consumers in terms of low priced products. Internet marketing is nothing but an iteration of the direct marketing, available 24/7. It is quick and convenient, and again, because the middlemen are removed from the chain of distribution, the products are provided to the ultimate consumers at lower prices and with better discounts. Then we have the system of telemarketing or telephone marketing, which is used to persuade the customers to buy usually products which are not otherwise purchased by them. For example, an insurance policy, a credit card or a loan. Telemarketing can be impacted through calling or even through a system of short messaging services. Then we have the documents which we used in internal trade. We have performa invoice and invoice, which are altogether similar to each other, with the only difference that a performa invoice is sent to the consumer prior to the actual sale, containing the estimate of the purchase price. On the other hand, invoice is sent to a consumer after the actual sale is impacted. Then we have two notes which are used in internal trade, known as debit note and credit note. Both the notes can be written by either of the parties. A person who receives a debit note certifies that his account is to be debited or has already been debited, and a person receiving a credit note is a person who is intimated that his account has been credited. Then we have a lorry receipt, which is issued by a transport company provided goods are sent through a transport company. This lorry receipt contains the details of the transporter, the details of the sender and the details of the receiver. Lastly, we have terms of trade as COD, which stands for cash on delivery, wherein the goods are delivered by the manufacturer to the ultimate consumer, and on delivery the customer pays for the products. Free on board is a facility wherein all the costs will be borne by the manufacturer or the supplier until the goods reaches to a board. CIF, or more popularly known as cost, insurance and freight, is an extension of free on board with the inclusion of insurance and freight to the cost. Then we have E and OE, which stands for errors and omissions expected. because no one can rule out clerical errors. So usually at the bottom of the document, we insert E and OE, which stands for the possibility of any clerical error. And before we wind the presentation up, a quick recap of what we have discussed so far in this lecture. We started with the meaning of internal trade. We understood the classification of internal trade in terms of wholesale trade and retail trade. We also discussed various services provided by the wholesalers and the retailers. Then we discussed the types of retail trade in terms of itinerant retail and the fixed shop retail. We also talked about the recent trends of marketing in terms of direct marketing, internet marketing and telemarketing. Lastly, we discussed the documents used in internal trade, for example, the invoices, the pro forma invoice, the final invoice, debit note, credit note, terms of trade, etc. And with this, the lecture is concluded. Thank you so much for watching. I wish you all a very happy learning.